Okay, gentlemen, we're going to continue now with Shir Lamed Zayin, which begins with the Gemara quoting a brisa that is somewhat cryptic and difficult to understand. The brisa starts, Toner Rabbanon ein shamin kav mipnei shemashbichai, that we do not evaluate a kav because it profits him. And again, we don't know who it profits. The brisa continues, V'loi beis kor, we do not evaluate a base core because it makes him lose out. It hurts him. Now again, we do not know what this brisa means. It does not explain that much. And the Gemara now is going to attempt to explain what this brisa means. The first thing we need to explain is exactly what is a kav. Now we're familiar with the saw. Now a kav is 6 kavs fit into one saw. Now it's important to understand that whenever we use the word kav, saw, kur, all these names are names of volume, not names of area of land. It's not a measurement of area, but a measurement of volume. So the Gemara begins now with explaining the first clause, and it brings down Rav Papa. Amar Rav Papa, Hachi Kamar, this is what the brisa means. Ein shamin kav, we do not evaluate a kav of grain. That means the measurement of grain. B'shishim kavim, in 60 kavim of land. And that means that if an animal eats a kav of grain, we do not take that amount of land that it would take to grow 1 kav and multiply that land by 60. Mipnei shemashbiach mazik, because it will end up profiting the mazik. The mazik will end up coming ahead. And the Gemara over here explains why that is. Rashi rather explains why that is. And number one, he says, because 60 kavim does not have a very high demand. It's not that large. It's 10 saw. It's too expensive. It's 60 base kav, which means the area that it takes for a kav to grow does not have a very high demand, because it's too expensive for a poor person to buy that much land, but it's too little land for a regular person. And therefore, there are not that many people that want it, and it is a relatively cheap land. And Rashi gives another reason why. And he says, because the loss of 1 kav isn't noticeable, since it's so little. And therefore, a piece of land like this, in our example, will go for $1,250. Now, just to tell you how I got to this number, as you remember, in Shir Lamed Hey, we were discussing a 60 saw farm, which is over here. Now, 60 saw farm, the bottom right-hand corner, that red box over there, is 10 saw, which is the 60 kav. Now, a 60 saw farm, in our example, costs $9,000, which comes out, according to the calculation, of $150 for each base saw, for each area of land that would produce a saw. Now, which would then come out to be that if someone buys a farm for $9,000, he paid $1,500 for 10 saw, for 10 base saw. 10 base saw, again, a base saw is the area that it would take to grow a saw of produce. Now, in our case, where if we would take a kav of produce and then multiply it to 60 base kav, or 60 area it would take to grow a kav, it would, Rashi explains, it would be cheap, and which would be $1,250, which will come out then that every base saw is worth $125. Now, if it's that cheap, then the mazik is very happy because he ends up getting off easy and he gets off paying less. Now, Rav Papa continues with the second clause of the brisa, which says, "V'loi base kor mipnei shepoigmai." We do not evaluate a base core because it hurts him. And again, Rav Papa explains that it's referring to the mazik. V'loi kor. We do not take a core of produce eaten by an animal and then multiply it in shishim, in 60 kurin, which 60 base core, an area that it would take to grow 60 core, mipnei shepoigem mazik, because it is going to make the mazik lose out. Now, a core of land is 30 saw, which comes out to be 180 kav. That is a core of land. Now, if an animal managed to eat a core of produce, then we do not take that base core where a core of produce will grow on and multiply it by 60. And the reason why we don't do that is because an area of land that is 60 core is massive and it's very expensive. And Rashi explains the reason why it's expensive is because 60 core is a very large piece of land that is rarely put up for sale. Wealthy people would pay much more than the value of the land to purchase such a large parcel. And therefore, it will end up coming out that the mazik will have to pay a large amount of money for the damage that he did. Another reason why they don't use a 60 core piece of land is because a missing core is a large amount of produce and will easily be recognizable that it's missing, and therefore we do not use a 60 core land. Now, just to illustrate over here how 60 core costs more, let's say this land costs $380,000, which will end up being that each core costs $6,333. Now, excuse me. If you remember from Shir Lamed Hey, where we had a 30 saw land, which is a core, it was $6,000. Now over here it's $6,333, which will end up being $211 for each base saw. Now, in such a case, the mazik ends up losing out because the mazik has to pay more money than normal value. So again, just to recap, what Rav Papa learns up that you do not evaluate using a kav and then multiply that in 60 base kav, because it will end up coming out that the mazik will pay too low of a price, and we do not take a core and then multiply it into 60 base core, because it will end up causing the mazik to pay an expensive more than is necessary. The Gemara asks a question on this pshat, and that is, according to Rav Papa, we don't need to evaluate a kav of produce into 60 base kav of produce, and we don't evaluate a core of produce to 60 base core of land. And again, let me just say that again. According to Rav Papa, we don't evaluate a kav of produce into a 60 base kav of land, and we don't evaluate a core of produce into a 60 base core of land. But if you look at the Brisa over here, it's inconsistent, because the Brisa says ein shaman kav of produce in a 60 base kav of land. In the second part of the Brisa, it should have said v'loy core, not v'loy base core. Why does it say base core, which is an area of land? It should have been consistent with the first part. If the first part was talking about a volume of food, it should have said in the second part, and we don't evaluate a core of produce in a 60 base core of land. And therefore the Gemara gives an alternative pshat. And that is on the first clause of the Brisa, where it says, Ein shaman kav mipnei shemash bichai. The Gemara says, Ela Amar Rav Huna bar Manoach mishmei derav Acha b'rei derav Ika. Hachi katani, this is what the Brisa meant to say. Ein shaman kav b'fnei atzmai. We do not evaluate a kav of produce on the land where it grew by itself. Mipnei shemashbiach nizik. Over here, it's not the mazik anymore; it's the nizik. It's the one that became damaged. If you don't make this kav as part of a larger field and just assess that area of land itself, it will end up causing the damager to pay a high price. And we don't evaluate it by itself. This again was obviously the halacha that was discussed in the beginning of this Amud, that we do it, or the Mishnah said it, that we evaluate the damage done to a field as if it was part of a larger field. We don't evaluate it as if that is the field itself, that kav area was eaten. We don't evaluate how much that piece of land by itself became worth less because the kav was eaten up, but rather we assess it as part of a larger parcel of land. So that's the first statement. We don't evaluate a kav of produce by itself in that area of land. And then for the second part of the Brisa, v'loy base core, the way that he explains it is v'loy kav, and not a kav in a base core, which is a 180 kav, nizik, because it will cause the nizik to lose out. Again, 1 out of 180 is going to be a very small amount of that, and it will end up causing the nizik to not really get paid at all. And therefore, what we do is, rather, the Gemara says, we do in shishim, which means we take the area of land that was eaten, and we multiply it by 60, which was the opinion again of Chizkiah in our Gemara before. So we take a piece of land that doesn't have anything missing, and then a piece of land with the part that was missing, and we see the difference of the value, which is the opinion of Chizkiah, that we do 60 times the amount of the damage that was done, which happens to be the way the halacha is in the Shulchan Aruch.